Good morning, Spurs fans, and welcome to the biggest little soccer podcast on YouTube. It is Stateside Footy, and God damn it, man, it is Black Friday here in the United States. But there's nothing black about Tottenham Hotspur unless you're counting the 9 goals conceded over the last 2 games. I guess that would be considered dark. But that being said, joining me today is one half of the best Spurs YouTube podcast literally on the internet, man. I don't know how you cannot say that. Of course, it is the Irish Hotspur himself, Dave Harris. Good morning, Dave. How you doing?
Yeah, good morning, Steve. Not too bad whatsoever. Can't complain. Big game tomorrow. Oh, sorry, I'm just trying to share your stream here in my post section. Let people know where we're at. But big game tomorrow, lad. Absolutely cannot wait. I'm buzzing, and like I said, it's what we live for.
I would agree. Before we get started, make sure you hit the like and subscribe buttons, and also make sure you hit the notification bell, because this weekend is a monster weekend on Stateside Footy, as we have a triple header of live streams tomorrow. Of course, it begins with the Hotspur watch along Spurs versus Fulham, live from N17, and of course we have the MLS Conference Final doubleheader. And that is going to be absolutely monumental as we wind down the MLS season. So definitely make sure you hit the like and subscribe buttons there. All right, let's go ahead and get into it. First and foremost, Dave, your thoughts on this week, because you and I have had conversations pre-North London Derby, post-North London Derby. You seem to have an opinion regarding Thomas Frank. Then all of a sudden we go to PSG. And then all of a sudden, it feels like our attacking prowess actually was turned on for this one. Obviously, Xavi Simons actually starts on the bench this one. Kudu starts on the bench in this one. And then obviously no Brent Johnson, because he pulled the red card the last go-around of the Champions League. And yet all of a sudden, Kolo Muani finds his feet in Paris. Now, I wonder if that was just the fact that he's playing for his home club. Maybe he wants to remind them just exactly what kind of talent he absolutely has. We'll just start here before we get into our topics. Your thought on the week that was, and where do you stand now post North London Derby, post PSG?
Yeah, look, with the North London Derby, look, we done the build up. We sort of said going into the game, don't care about the formation, back 4, back 5. We all agreed it probably would have been a back 5, but what we couldn't do is go in waving the white flag. There has to be a game plan in around that defensive system to be able to go and engage the ball, try and turn it over, and then also a plan in possession, an area of weakness or where we can go and target. And in the North London Derby, there was absolutely none of that. We just went in there, pulled our pants down, and said, "Look, just take the 3 points." And I was left very, very frustrated and very dejected after it. Don't get me wrong, the players don't evade any criticism, high intensity runs, stuff like that. There was just no energy there. There was no pride there, no passion there whatsoever. And, it's nowhere near good enough. At the end of the day, if Vicario comes out apologizing after the game, I'm absolutely fed up with it, Stevie. I've heard more apologies after big games in the last few years than what I've actually seen performances or Tottenham turn up in them. And it's nowhere near good enough from the players' point of view. And they don't have an excuse, because this has happened under previous managers as well. Where I was really frustrated with Thomas Frank is because, look, to be fair, amongst all the fanfare of Thomas Frank, I probably was one of the only YouTubers out there that actually sat there and sort of said, look, I'm not enamored around this appointment, and these are the reasons why. One of them was, is he going to be able to adjust stepping up from Brentford to Tottenham? Because at Brentford, his team had some of the lowest percentage stats in the league. That's not going to fly at Tottenham. I said, if this guy wants to work at Tottenham, he's going to have to change his style of football. And I think after North London Derby, I think we approached that point. I think many fans were very, very underwhelmed in terms of the way we set up, the way we approached the game, and what we were looking to get out of it and stuff. So I was very annoyed with Thomas Frank. And look, going into the PSG game, Stevie, for me, it was a free hit. It wasn't one where I was going to determine Frank's future or any player's future off the back of it. I understand the magnitude of the task. But all I wanted to see was a bit of heart, a bit of commitment, a bit of desire, but also a fucking game plan. Again, I understood that it was maybe going to be a bit defensive, but I want to see how we're going to get at that PSG team and, how we're going to look to lay a glove on them. Because one thing I can't tolerate is going into games and just going, we're going to look to set up and try and take a point out of this. Because once they score, your game plan is completely out the window. And I got that against PSG. I got my game plan in my predicted lineup. I actually said, The area, the area we could get at them, although they're so technically in there, was their midfield. I said, if we can get bodies in and around there, we can use our aggression and our physicality because it's something they are not used to. And with Thomas Frank selecting them 4 midfielders, I think it threw a lot of confusion. But again, in the half an hour before before kickoff on my watch along, I sort of said, I understand the game plan. He's going to get all 4 midfielders, converge their midfield tree, and look to cause them problems. And that's exactly what happened on the night. And then look, going forward, we had 2 strikers up top. But another area I said that we should target against PSG was their right back, because Hakimi was out injured and they were playing a centre midfield in there. And that's exactly where our first goal came from. And these are things where I was getting frustrated with Frank Stevie, because look, not being funny, but if a little fucking fat fucker like me from Ireland can sit there and pinpoint the weakness against PSG and pinpoint an area where I think we could use our strengths against them and try and get a bit of joy, then what the fuck have the coaching team and Thomas Frank been doing? So I'm glad that they actually executed the game plan going into this, because look, when I sort of flag my criticisms around some of the stuff that Frank has done, like the amount of rotation and stuff like that, it's not because I want the guy gone at all. It's because I want the guy to succeed. At the end of the day, my only main aim and my main agenda is how we get Tottenham to winning games consistently, putting back-to-back results together and stuff like that. And when I bring up these things, it's only because these are areas he needs to improve to help Tottenham kick on, and that's all it is. But I think many people maybe get confused that I'm sort of Frank out and stuff like that. But I've never once said it. I've just highlighted going forward. Don't get me wrong, I do believe there's an element where he needs a little bit more quality to help.
Oh, without a doubt.
The reality is, against PSG, we've shown we do have the ability to go and score goals with the current crop we've got. But it all comes down to the instructions in and around the formation and what they're allowed to do. Frank took the handbrake off. You allow players to get forward, like Archie Gray and Bergvall combined for the first goal. When was the last time we've seen midfielders allowed to flood forward and go and affect the game and stuff like that? So all in all, I'm left with a lot of positives off the back of the PSG game. Let's see how we're going to go after Fulham tomorrow.
I will say this, that when Thomas Frank was appointed, I was actually okay with it, because quite frankly, maybe it's just me, but I kind of like a defensive structure with the team. And I actually kind of appreciate the counterattacking game, especially if you have speed and if you can be direct on a counterattack. You're going to end up scoring a lot of goals. But the reality is, because you're defensively sound, you're going to be in every single match. And then all it takes is one, because you understand this game of football, Dave. It's a crazy ass sport. It's a chess match, but it's also, the best team generally, the best team does win, but also the best team can be beaten, especially if that counterattacking team is on their game that day. But I also said this, though, that you have to understand that Thomas Frank was at Brentford for 8 years. He helped that team get into the Premier League, and he also stabilized it, right? So by the time year 8 came around, he had his team around him, right? His recruiting staff were able to isolate players that played to his strengths. And because of it, those players understood exactly where they're supposed to be on the pitch. They understand the verbiage. They understand everything that goes into executing a Thomas Frank team. And then he makes the move to Tottenham Hotspur. And then you're going from one extreme to the other, because this team largely was assembled for the likes of an Ange Postecoglou, who played an extreme attacking style football. And now you're asking the team to swap on a dime and play a completely different way. And we understand that players today are not developed the way that footballers 30, 40, 50 years ago were developed, right? They're now specifically developed for certain tactics. Some center backs are designed are developed for a back 3. Some are developed for a back 4. Some midfielders are developed to be a straight attacking cam, and some are developed as classical 10s, right? So I mean, players today are specifically developed for a specific style of play, depending on the club in which they sign for. And so now all of a sudden you have 100 moving parts when it comes to Spurs, on top of everything that happened in the front office with Spurs as well too, trying to actually get that recruiting staff together, to try to elevate a guy like Thomas Frank. And I knew there was going to be there were going to be moments within the first couple months, right? We're going to see good, we're going to see bad, we're going to see indifferent, we're going to see whatever, we're going to see a lot of, we're going to see a lot of different results. And so from that standpoint, coming into the North London Derby, the only thing that I was upset was the fact that he conceded possession in the name of defensive structure in that match. And the reality is when you look at Arsenal, it's not just the talent that Arsenal has, it's the fact that they run their asses off. Every single moment they're running. Whether it's in the press or whether they're trying to get forward, whether they're jumping into tackles, whether they're going up for 50-50 balls, that team hustles. And when you concede possession, we were actually pinned in for a good portion of that game. We couldn't even get out of our own end. And it makes it awfully hard to try to play a counterattacking style with a back five when you know for a fact that every single time you touch the ball, there's 2 red shirts on the ball. And we struggled for a reason. But then for whatever reason, listen, I can't explain it, but we have a tendency to switch on and off in game. And then all of a sudden our defensive structure are going to start leaking goals. And we saw that with Eberechi Eze. All of a sudden our defensive structure, and mind you, we had 3 center backs on the pitch there for a long period of time. We have a back five, and we also, allegedly had 2 center defensive mids there to protect the top of the 18-yard box. And now all of a sudden, they're shooting lanes for Eberechi Eze. They're not closing down space. And all of a sudden, we got punished in that game. It was the same thing against PSG. And I heard you, post PSG saying, "Listen, it was a free hit. It was PSG. They're one of the best teams in Europe." Well, so was Arsenal. And the same problems against Arsenal happened against PSG, where all of a sudden we're not closing down space when we otherwise should be. Now, on the one hand, we actually look good getting forward. I will give you that. And I thought that Lucas Bergvall and Archie Gray did a very good job in that match. And I also thought Papsar was actually, at times, was absolutely brilliant. And he, again, shows us why he probably should be in the starting 11. But that being said, the philosophy, the nexus of what Thomas Frank wants to be is structurally sound defensively, and then being able to counter moving forward. And the fact of the matter is, it's like 50% of that equation is to be in games, and all of a sudden we're making mistakes. Christian Romero, for God's sake, that dude switched off, and then all of a sudden we're leaking goals. That game probably should have ended 3-3, but 2 mistakes, and all of a sudden they pump in 5. Right? There's no excuse. Me personally, I'm just that type of guy where I look at it. It's like, dude, if you're pumping in 5 and you have your best defensive line, your best defensive shape on the pitch, there's no excuses for that. And so now, for me, it brings in another set of questions. But that being said, it's that's kind of where I'm at right now. Right, why I got this uneasy feeling where all of a sudden you concede 9 goals in 2 matches.
Just on, Arsenal being one of the best teams in Europe right now, they are, but it's North London Derby is never a free hit. I'll be honest, I've seen teams of similar or worse quality go in there and give it more of a bash. That's where I sort of don't exclude. That's where I do not excuse what happened against Arsenal, because at the end of the day, in a derby game, if you're not as good as them, then you outrun them and you got to be prepared to outfight them. And none of that was there on the day. But I'd argue the way we were set up. I have no problem with Thomas Frank wanting to bring in defensive structure and stuff like that.
Sure.
No problem with it whatsoever. I think every team should have a bit of defensive structure for sure if you want to be able to go and compete. But the problem is when your line of engagement is so low and you're not instructing these players to go and trigger press, for instance. I'm not saying go man for man all over the pitch, but as soon as one player touches the ball, use him as your trigger press and send everybody. That doesn't happen. And then when you do turn over the ball and you don't have a game plan in possession and you don't instruct your players or give them the freedom to get up or get out, eventually you're going to concede goals. And that's exactly what happened against Arsenal. Because we had no game plan in terms of how to lay a glove on them, we were set up to lose that game. And that's just the reality of it. But it's not the first time we've seen this. Man United for large periods was exactly the same. Yep. Chelsea was exactly the same, Bournemouth earlier on in the season, exactly the same. There's so many times we've been set up in a certain way that just doesn't suit us. You go back to where we've been best this season. We've been aggressive out of possession. We've turned the ball over in midfield or a bit higher up. PSG, first game in the Super Cup, we've done exactly that to them. Burnley done that to them, scored a couple of goals off the back
Yep.
of Pat Sarr, turned the ball over. Man City, the exact same thing. Our joy against PSG the other night, getting in amongst them. Our goal against Arsenal, Paulinho broke ranks, won the ball,
Correct.
Richarlison put it in the back of the net. Why is Thomas Frank not recognizing this? If me as a fan, can sit there and see that we are better and the squad in general is better when you release the handbrake and allow them to go and press the ball, why aren't you allowing them to do this? And that's where I get very frustrated with Thomas Frank in that regard. I think there is an element to him that he made his living at Brentford in the Premier League, playing pragmatic, stifling the opposition. When you make that jump to a big club, you're asking him to change what's got him success to be able to adapt towards a big club. And, Nuno failed to do that. He couldn't adjust his tactics to appease Tottenham or even to suit the likes of Harry Kane and Son. And I feel like there's an element of that with Thomas Frank. However, where we're sitting right now, he's made a better fist of it than Nuno, and he still has an opportunity to prove to someone like me that he is the right guy for the job, that he can implement the right tactics. Because the reality is, why fans are at the point, why some are already at the point of Frank out, is because of the pragmatism, because of the way he sets up the team. The lack of aggression out of possession, the lack of a game plan in possession. And it's been absolutely killing us recently. And there is a part of that where Thomas Frank needs to change. Like he said, he came in here earlier on, it was all about setting up defensively and stuff like that. Fine. But we're not even defensively solid anymore. The basis of winning 9 games was we were keeping clean sheets, pressing out possession and winning ball. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, he drops the line of engagement and we're just at the mercy of the opposition. It's not going to fly at Tottenham Hotspur. You also mentioned about Eze scoring the goals in and around the edge of the area. Well, another 2 against PSG, exact same sort of positioning, right? So that got me thinking, Stevie. I said, all right, I'm going to go back and watch every game this season. And I'm going to actually see and calculate how many goals we've conceded from the edge of the area. Now, I actually was being a bit kind. There was one against Leeds where they shot from the edge of the area. Vicario spilled it and they tapped it home. There was another one against Arsenal that I didn't quite give as an edge of the area. And one against Bodo Glimt. But in reality, I think, I calculated 9. But when I went through it with some guys last night, they were saying, well, actually, Dave, it's actually at 11. Now, when I went and done a bit more research into it, I'm like, okay, why does this keep happening? Who's to blame? So I'm like looking at Vicario. I'm like, okay, not the biggest in goals, doesn't exactly have the biggest of frames. And if you do shoot into the corners from outside the box, you've got a good chance of bending it in. Then I'm looking at the centre midfielders, the double pivot. Could they go and close it down a hell of a lot more? Be aggressive, be alert to the danger. There's an element to that. Of course they should be. That's that. At the end of the day, when you look at it from the naked eye, they're the 2 people you're blaming for not being in that position to close it down. But if you actually go and look into Thomas Frank at Brentford, when they had Flecken last season, he faced the most shots from outside the box than any other goalkeeper. And he also made the most saves. So when it's a reoccurring pattern from Brentford to Tottenham, and then when I go and listen to what Frank says about not allowing his players to take shots from in and around or outside the box because he sees it as a low-risk opportunity, then in adverse, I think he's also setting up the other end, where if the instruction is for the midfielders to sit in and around that box, don't give up the box, don't give them any space, force them into long-range efforts. But the problem we've got is teams are absolutely punishing us. So I think basically he has no problem allowing the opposition to have ball in and around the edge of the area, because if he sees it as low risk opportunity of scoring going forward, he certainly sees it the same on the opposite end. And when it's carrying over from Brentford into Tottenham, I do think it is maybe one of the chinks in one of the flaws in Thomas Frank's sort of system. But then also I look at it and go, well, Flecken managed to pull off a lot of saves from the edge of the box. It wasn't really a massive problem for them. They were able to deal with it. So then does it come down to, and this is why I ultimately think Frank will go and get a new goalkeeper next summer. Does it come down to the goalkeeper maybe just not being good enough from shots from distance? Because we conceded 1 against PSG in the Super Cup, 1 against Brighton. There was 2 against Aston Villa, 3 against Arsenal, 2 against PSG again the other night. You know what I mean? So for me, I do think it's a flaw in Thomas Frank's sort of system. I think it's easily rectified. If you're playing a double pivot, if you want to not give up the box, Get one of them to drop in there, but just get the other one to hover around the semicircle on the edge of the box. And, he's in position then to ready go and block them balls and stuff like that. So there are things that I am seeing that I tried to highlight at Brentford that were happening that no one wanted to listen to at the time. But everyone's ears are open now when I highlight it, because given evidence, people can see it.
The interesting thing is I look at the back line and their positioning. And the interesting thing is that we're playing far deeper into the box as a back line, right? And I think a lot of that has to do with they don't want any inverted runs. They don't want any cheap goals from close.
Yeah.
But that being said, our goalkeeper is actually pretty good when it comes to point blank saves and things like that. And so our double pivot, are the two at the top of the 18. And so from that standpoint, there's too much area. There's too much area to put out fires. Whereas if you had your back line closer to the top of the 18, where you actually have your double pivot a little bit higher, as Chelsea did against us, as Arsenal did against us, as Manchester United, surprisingly did against us, as PSG did against us, their double pivots higher up. And so there's a better opportunity to kind of clear that fire, put out those fires a little bit higher up the pitch, so you actually don't get into position necessarily where you're essentially pinned back. And to me, that's kind of what I've seen. We're playing far too deeper, and it gives opposition attack far more opportunity to hold the ball and far more opportunity in front of that 18 to put shots on. And by the way, I think they understand exactly who Vicario is, and what he can and what he can't do. And there's a lot of teams that actually have good shooters from long range: Arsenal, PSG, Chelsea, Aston Villa, those type of teams, where it's like they understand exactly if they can get space in good areas in front of the 18, they're just going to put it on. And chances are you're going to score goals. And so I don't know if this is a situation where Thomas Frank is just the style of defense that he plays, or whether or not he sees it and adjusts and then moves that back line a little higher up. And that's going to allow the Spurs to put out fires before they actually become Category 5 places. All right, so let's go ahead and get into it, because I do want to talk about this guy right here. And Dave, so here's the thing. Xavi Simons was originally benched against Chelsea, and of course Lucas Bergvall takes the concussion, and Xavi has to come in and play a good chunk of that game. But he was benched against Manchester United, benched against Arsenal, and he was benched against PSG. And so I guess the question that comes to my mind is, has Thomas Frank lost faith in the 52 million pound striker, central attacker? The interesting thing about this is when I look at his body of work so far with Spurs, me personally, I don't necessarily think he's used correctly. And this is the same issue. That Florian Wirtz is having at Liverpool. When you look at Xavi Simons and how they played him at Red Bull Leipzig, they were a direct attack. And he is best, just like Florian Wirtz, he's best with the foot at his ball moving forward, right? Inside runs, creating with space in front of the top of the 18-yard box. Essentially, you use the term without a handbrake. And that's exactly the way that they were essentially playing at Red Bull Leipzig, where you actually get the very best of them. And of course, he was kind of a talisman there with Red Bull Leipzig. And so from that standpoint, he's, very world-class with the ball at his feet. But then when you look at the way that Thomas Frank plays in the buildup and the way that he's trying to score goals, essentially from the wings in, there's not a lot of room for him to actually control the ball at the top of the 18. As a matter of fact, when you get into that horseshoe formation, as we tend to get in the buildup, where is he located? On the outside off the left-hand side. He's not staying in central areas. And so from that standpoint, me personally, I just don't think that Thomas Frank is necessarily using him or necessarily recognizes his strengths that he can bring. And from that standpoint, when you actually keep him away from the 18-yard box, you kind of take away his best attributes. I don't necessarily think this is a lack of trust. I just think it's a lack of recognition of exactly what you have on your hands.
No, look, I think you're absolutely fair there. For me, Stevie, I just don't think he knows what to do with the guy. He's never had a player like that at Brentford. At Brentford, it was a hard-working backline, a very industrious midfield, and then hit the ball to the 3-4 players that were fast, quick, and strong.
Yeah,
with Xavi Simons, he requires a game plan in possession so that you can get the best out of the guy. We're happy to concede possession And that's a problem right there. So I don't think he actually knows how to use them. Now, and I also think Frank has sort of screwed himself a little bit, because it's clear to me that, we were looking for that hard-working number 10, not just a guy that out of possession doesn't do that and, waits for us to get the ball back and give it to him. When you look at Eze, works hard out of possession. We tried to get Morgan Gibbs White, works extremely hard out of possession. Xavi Simons, when I've done my research into him, everything all of his coaches said at every different club, every different age group, the guy works extremely hard out of possession. And to a degree, you can actually see that, when things aren't going his way, he'll still muck in, he'll still work hard, try and get in tackles and stuff like that. So that right there shows me that Thomas Frank doesn't just want a luxury player. He wants a player that, most importantly, is going to muck in out of possession. And therefore, that's where I'm already sort of worried, because Frank has never had that luxury player or that player of that profile to fit into his Brentford squad. He has to at Tottenham Hotspur. You need that guy, because when you're coming up against teams that a lot of them sit low block against you, especially when we're at home, you need someone like Xavi Simons. And to be fair, like when he put Xavi Simons in the team, he was trying to accommodate him. He took out Papa Matasar, and he absolutely disrupted the flow and the rhythm of that Tottenham team, because when we were winning games at the start of the season, Paulinho, Bentancur, Sarr, strong, aggressive, physical. We were winning all of the midfield battles. He takes Sarr out of the team to accommodate Xavi Simons. All of a sudden, we lose that aggression. We lose that sort of ability to go and turn the ball higher up the pitch. And then I'm looking at Xavi Simons. Now, this is amongst all the fanfare again, when everyone was wanking themselves off to this signing, I was, again, one of the only ones that sat there and said, guys, don't pin all your hopes on this guy. It's going to take him a while to adjust.
Yep.
He's going to take him a while to physically adjust, but also at the speed of the Premier League. And we've seen that so far. So then when I look at him playing and he's vacating the middle and hanging out on the left-hand side, I go to myself, right, okay, at one stage when I was younger, I was a similar stature and size to him. When I was coming up against more physical players, why was I moving position? Because I wanted to try and find time and space where I could get on the ball without that physicality, so that I could go and create damage. So that's why then Xavi Simons is moving out to the left-hand side. Now, what Xavi Simons does need to learn is similar like Luka Modric. And this is, I learned this very quickly when I was younger as well. Instead of clogging up space and everything else for your wingers and your fullback to operate in, simple. Make a double movement. Pretend you're going to go in behind, then all of a sudden show in front. You get 5-10 yards, you're separated. All of a sudden you can get turned, you can play. But then when he does get on the ball, like for instance against Man United, where's the wingers flying ahead of him for him to play it into? Where's the striker running in behind for him to play into? Where's one of the centre midfielders or one of the fullbacks breaking forward to give this guy options? There is none.
That's exactly right.
Quite frankly, Xavi Simons doesn't suit Thomas Frank's system, because we are set up to counter but not dominate possession, and that's why Xavi Simons is not working for Thomas Frank. But then when he is earlier on in the when we signed him and he is hanging out on the left hand side, at what point does Frank go, okay, I'll play him off the left where he does get more time and space in possession, let him find his feet there, and then once he's comfortable, then I can start moving him into the middle. He didn't do that. He just took him straight out of the lineup and has put him on the bench since. And that's, someone like Xavi Simons, 4 players, they're confident players. When you're being dropped by a manager, you hate that guy. You absolutely hate him. You can't understand why you're not in the team, especially if you're a Xavi Simons. Big money, comes with a big reputation, played at PSG, Barcelona, teams like that, and he can't get into this Tottenham side. And that is purely because Thomas Frank does not know how to use the guy. When you go back to that Copenhagen game, now look, granted, the opposition, not a great opposition.
Of course.
But he got the ball in the number 10 role. He had Kudus running in ahead of him. He had Brennan Johnson running down the right-hand side. Udebur off the left-hand side. Players breaking out from the middle. He came off the pitch with a couple of assists that night and could have had more if the finishing was better. So it goes to show that if we are set up in the right way and we get bodies forward and we instruct these players to start running in behind and not always come to feet. And I do think that's a Thomas Frank instruction, by the way, because he's defensive first. He's always thinking about protecting that back line. So it's of my educated guess that he is instructing these players not to break above the ball, so that if we lose it, We've got bodies behind the ball so that they find it hard to break down. But at what point, when you get the ball to Xavi Simons, do you say to your players, right, break, now's the time to break, get forward, give the guy options? And I think the Xavi Simons problem, there's a part of it down to him acclimatizing, but mostly because Thomas Frank just does not know how to use the guy. Doesn't know. He's never had a player of this profile to fit in.
Yeah, I was going to say, because at times when Xavi's actually looked good, it's on the counter after a turnover in the mid, and he's got 15 yards of space to run forward, and then he inverts his run to the central areas. But I think you highlighted it perfectly. There is nobody there. There's nobody to distribute the ball, because it's either Richarlison or Kolomwani getting bodied by a center back, and then they get chipped off the run, and so there's nowhere to go centrally. And unfortunately, it's the same on the wings. For whatever reason, we just don't have outside runners. And so from that standpoint, all of a sudden, holding midfielders will collapse on the ball, and all of a sudden the play goes dead. And then all of a sudden you have to pass back, and then we're resetting. And now all of a sudden we can't find an inlet because, for whatever reason, we're not getting runners on the inside or the outside. And so it is what it is. What I will say is, I was thinking about this morning, Dave, like, if Xavi Simons came here last year with a guy like Ange Postecoglou, and when we saw, I guess you can say, Ange ball at its finest in the first, I guess you can say, 10 games of last season, when he was playing with two high tens and you were getting those inverted runs with Kulusevski and Madison, I would probably assume this would look a little bit different, just considering I would probably assume that a guy like Ange Postecoglou knows exactly what to do with a guy like Xavi Simons. Which I guess reinforces my idea that I just don't necessarily think that this was necessarily a good fit for Thomas Frank, because I think you highlighted it perfectly. It's the fact that it's not an issue of trust. I just don't necessarily think he knows how to use them. Yeah. And so from that standpoint, I guess the next logical question for you is, at what point does Thomas Frank actually have to potentially scrap some of his philosophy in order to get some of these guys actually playing the way that they're intended to play? At what point does he say, like, listen, okay, cool, there's a good potential that my job is on the line, and so maybe it's time to kind of tweak some of this stuff and actually get this team a little bit more direct and more front-footed?
I think the time is now, Stevie. Look, the pressure's on. There's massive debates all over the internet. Frank in, Frank out. People are giving reasons for and against. When it's already divisive like that, the time is now, because if the results and performances to a large degree keep happening the way they are, he's not even going to see Christmas. But I also question, how much is he really going to release the handbrake and start, because, look, I get the ability of Richarlison, I get the ability of Johnson. But the reality is, he's been given Kolomwani, he's been given Xavi Simons, he's been given Kudus, players that we didn't have last year, that I would argue, if we actually gave Ange Postecoglou instead of signing Udo Barantel, probably would still be in a job today, I would argue.
I would probably argue that too. Yeah.
When it comes to Thomas Frank, I mean, he has to do it now. Because the reality is, the fact that he's only ever managed that Brentford at a certain level in the Premier League and played a certain way, he's going to get less grace than maybe a Jose or a Conte, because although they play a pragmatic way, they've proven they can win that way. They've proven that they can go and deliver trophies that way. With Thomas Frank, he's only ever really sort of proven mid-table security. And at Tottenham Hotspur, that's not our ambition. So unless he sort of changes that quickly, he will not see until Christmas, because the fans simply will not give the guy the patience, in my opinion. But this is where I don't think he helps himself. As bad as we were under Ange Postecoglou, and look, right decision at the end of the season, in hindsight, to let him go and let him sort of move on and us go in a separate direction, absolutely right decision. But he, I would argue, got a lot more out of Richarlison in general, despite his limitations. He got a hell of a lot more out of Brennan Johnson, despite his limitations. When I look at Thomas Frank, and he can barely get anything out of those guys, plus what we've brought in, that shows me that it's not just down to a quality issue, because if it was, one half of the front line would be outperforming the other. We're not seeing that. We're seeing everyone sort of come out with the same results, up to this part of the season, which then proves to me it's actually a system problem in terms of against PSG. He allowed midfielders to break forward, allowed the fullbacks, to break forward, which gave us options, which then means we could create pass moves and stuff. Now, of course, at times this season, we've had breakaways where you would argue some of the passing has been a little bit sloppy, under hit behind players, killing the momentum of the attack, stuff like that. That there is an element to that. But in general, I don't see these players being instructed to run in behind. I see everything 2 feet, little intricate 1-2s and stuff like that, so that we can retain possession rather than take risk. But I'm not being funny. Going forward, it's all about taking risk. We're going to win games. It's about taking risk. And Frank is anti-risk. That's where I struggle to believe that he's really going to get this attack going. Because to be honest with you, Stevie, at Brentford, I know he done a great job there. But another thing I questioned around the signing is how much of Brentford's success is down to Thomas Frank, and how much of it is actually down to their scouting model, which is actually designed to pick up undervalued players in the market, that when they look at all of their stats and stuff, they actually predict they're going to hit a certain ceiling. And it's the exact same with Brighton scouting.
I think
model.
it's
they're two
I think it's 50-50. I think it's 50-50. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, you have to have a guy who's able to coach some of these players up, right? And so I think that Thomas Frank actually got the most of those guys with Brentford. But 100%, 100%, a good chunk of that comes down to their scouting model as well, too. Identifying, I guess you can say, unfinished diamond or uncut gems. And you bring them into a system that, that cultivates good players. So I would probably say that the reason why that they had success, or what Brentford would be considered a success, is because they had a coach that mirrored their scouting department, and that's the problem with Tottenham, is because he now doesn't necessarily have that scouting model. And the reality is, understand exactly over the last couple head coaches, did our scouting model actually fit the style of play that the manager wanted to play? Did our scouting model actually fit Jose Mourinho? Did it fit Maurizio Pochettino to the end? The Italian guy, what's his name? His name is slipping my mind right now. Conte. Did they fit Ange Postecoglou? And you and I had massive conversations about the scouting not necessarily fitting what Ange Postecoglou wanted to play, and it was almost putting a square peg in a round hole. It just didn't fit, and he had to make do with what he had at his disposal. And I would probably argue right now, Thomas Frank is in that same boat, but obviously we're post Levy now, so maybe it changes, maybe it doesn't. Who knows? Obviously, I can't predict the future. So right now, Thomas Frank is playing with players that are used to playing a certain high attacking type of system that actually left the midfield wide open. And of course, it was easy to play behind us with that back line. And so now he's changing the exact same thing. And again, I kind of figured that we would probably be in this boat, right? At this point in time.
I hear what you're saying around the the model, but I'd argue we have gone a long way to try and help Thomas Frank, more than what we have under managers.
Of course.
We brought in Paulinho, 6 foot odd, strong, physical. That's a player that's a Thomas Frank player. He wants guys that are big, strong, and physical. A guy that can come into that midfield and provide presence. We brought in Kudos, a guy, again, that's a big, strong, physical player that can carry the ball, similar to some of the players he had at Brentford. We brought in Colin Mawani, big, strong, another guy that can. So we have gone a long way to try and really help Thomas Frank in that regard. And plus, we signed Xavi Simons. We signed 3 forward players because we knew we had a forward line issue for him, so that he wouldn't suffer the same as what we did last year. But I'd argue probably looks worse than what we were last year. But also, the reason why I question, is it 50-50 down to Thomas Frank and the scouting model, is because you look at Brentford right now. They're just continuing on the exact same way. They've lost their coaching staff, they've lost Thomas Frank, and they've lost all their best players. But yet they're still continuing on, and they're still punching above their weight right now, with a guy in Keith Andrews who's absolutely inexperienced at this level, but yet they're not too far behind us in terms of takeaway from the Premier League games. They've laid their glove on bigger teams than what we have and stuff like that. And that's why I argue how much of it is down to Frank, how much of it is down to Brentford. You go and look at Brighton, who basically their thing is the exact same.
They have the exact same model.
But look at what everyone thought once Potter went, they were going to collapse. They've kicked on. Potter went to Chelsea. Didn't work out. His reputation gone downhill. But yet Brighton are still motoring on. And that's why I question how much of it is actually down to, because when they sign these players, no one knows who they are. but their scouting model predict they're going to hit a certain ceiling, and clubs are coming to these clubs, picking off their players for big money, which shows to me how much of it is actually down to, their recruitment model and then bringing in players that are carrying these managers to a certain point because of the ceiling that they're going to hit. And when I look at Brighton continuing on, and when I look at Brentford continuing on, that's why I'm now sort of taking an approach where I actually praise them, what they're doing with inside the club and the ownership and the model they've set up, more so than the actual managers going in there. Now, of course, there's an element that the manager has to get the best out of what he's given, and you can make that argument for these guys taking over at these clubs. But when they're continuing to operate at that level every year, and probably improving despite losing their best players and stuff, it actually says more about the model that they've devised to be able to sustain themselves in the Premier League than actually some of the staff in and around the club.
I would also add to that both both Brentford and Brighton are balanced teams, that even when they do lose a big player, there's always somebody coming right up from behind them, and so they are always going to maintain the spine of their team, which is something that we don't necessarily have. We're not exactly strong down the middle, and I think with their two recruiting models, they're always going to be in a position where they can plug and play the manager because the environment stays the same. Right, the shape of the team stays the same. The backroom staff stays the same. The boardroom stays the same, and so with that, there's always going to be consistency. And Tottenham Hotspur has not exactly been the most consistent club over the last 6-7 years. So, Dave, we do have a question for you right here. This is coming from Carl Slim Blue, who asks, have you seen Mason Melia play? If so, what's your eye test saying on him playing Premier League football?
Yeah, now, with Mason Melia, I haven't watched him play a lot of games, but I have watched him play for the Ireland under 21s, the Ireland under 18s. I've watched him play for, St. Pat's in Europe and stuff like that. So I've watched a decent enough of him, but I haven't watched maybe as much as some other Spurs fans, because there are a couple of Spurs fans I know that do go to a lot of St. Pat's games. But I also have spoken to people that, know him or know the family and stuff like that. And when it comes to Mason Melia, he's not ready to come in and just hit the ground running in the Premier League. I think one thing that people need to factor in is if Xavi Simons is adjusting, stepping up, coming from Germany to the Premier League, and look at the struggles he's had. Look at Udeber, the struggles he's had from adapting from Burnley in the bottom of the Premier League to the top of the Premier League. It shows the gulf, and the bridge that these guys need to close. When it comes to Mason Melia, look, broke onto the scene for St. Pat's at 15. He's broke all the Ireland underage records. He's given himself a very good account of himself in terms of League of Ireland. He's shown that despite his tender age, physically and stuff like that, he can handle the League of Ireland. But the League of Ireland is a different ballgame to the Premier League in terms of they don't have the training facilities that the Premier League have. A lot of the clubs are actually, paying gyms, local gyms, so that these guys can go in and train and do the weights and stuff rather than have their own facilities and stuff. So that's one big problem, that when he comes over to Tottenham, it's all there. But I think for the first 6 months anyway, I wouldn't be surprised if they kept him around and just built him up in terms of getting him ready in terms of the training, the gym and stuff like that. Because there's a large element, because I've seen this story repeated, rinse and repeated time and time again. I actually listened to a podcast, where these guys, it's two guys basically. And when some of these Irish players come home on their holidays, they bring them out and they do a little bit of training with them. And they also get to do like full-length podcasts with them, interviewing them and stuff. And there's been so many that have left and gone to the likes of Palace, the likes of other clubs around the Premier League and stuff. But where they really struggle is they're coming from a first-team competitive environment, going over to these big clubs and then being put straight back into academy football. And they really struggle to kick on from that. They can't get their head around, the academy level over there because it's not competitive. And when you're taking a player out of that environment into academy football and stuff, they really, especially the Irish players, they really do struggle to adapt and stuff like that, and they can very easily then just get lost, get swallowed up within the league system, and the academy system and stuff. That's one fear I have for Mason Melia. But look, despite his age, 18, he's a big guy inside the box. He's a very good finisher. He's very clever. He reminds me a little bit of Robbie Keane, that his instincts, as soon as the ball lands at his feet, 9 times out of 10, He's already knows how he's going to finish it, what way he's going to do it, and he executes it. So he's a very good finisher in that regard. He can hold up the ball. He's just a fox in the box. But there's a lot of work to do with Mason Elliott's all-round game and, the acclimatization before we even see him in a Tottenham jersey. But interestingly enough, I spoke to a guy last year, not long after we signed him. His name is the Republic of Ireland Tracker on Twitter. And basically what he does is he lets everybody know anytime an Irish player plays a game in and around Europe or abroad and stuff, and gives us the updates. But he also is involved in a Republic of Ireland podcast where he goes to home and away games, and they talk about the Republic of Ireland. And he's very well in there with some family and stuff like that of some of these players, at all age groups. And I was shocked when he told me that Spurs promised this guy first team football, and that's why he signed on the dotted line. Also, when Mason Elliott gave an interview, he signed on the dotted line because of when he spoke to Ange Postecoglou. That's why he signed on the dotted line, because Postecoglou convinced him. Now, this was a guy that when he was over at Man City wanted to bring him in, send him out on loan, and gave him a clear pathway. He didn't want to go out on loan, so he didn't want to go near Man City. He was brought out to a couple of teams out in Germany, given trials, stuff like that. Promised everything again. Wasn't convinced. Celtic had him over. A lot of other teams around Europe. This guy was highly coveted, but he chose Tottenham because we told him he'd be coming straight into the first team. And when I was told that, I laughed. I said, look, this guy ain't getting anywhere near the first team because we barely give some of our academy players an opportunity and stuff like that. And with some of the shit we've got across the forward line, that, there's just no way he's walking into that first team. He's nowhere near ready. Now, what I will say from Tottenham's point of view is, when the season finished, which wasn't so long ago over here in the League of Ireland, he gave an interview and he basically said, Tottenham have had somebody with me and liaising with me to help me bridge the gap so that when I get over there, I'm settled, I'm more up to speed with training and stuff like that, because they are trying to help him already before he makes that move, which shows they are trying to help the kid bridge that gap, which is a good thing.
The interesting thing is, like, since the news that we actually signed him, I've seen Melia play twice, and the dude is legit. From his footwork, and positioning into the box to his finishing ability. As a youth player, you don't necessarily see that type of skill set. Usually, like there's I guess you can say, if like you describe a player as a 5 tool, and at that age, there's usually 2 things that they do really well. Then a club is looking to kind of maybe get 2 or 3 more tools over the course of 3 seasons before he elevates himself into the first team. And when you look at his player profile and you look at the ceiling, that dude is legit. That dude actually does have a very good opportunity to put himself in a position where he possibly can play himself into I guess you can say the conversations of some of the best young players that we've had over the history of Tottenham Hotspur. The other thing that I will say, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the contract that he signed was exclusively a first team contract. And I think that was one of the biggest reasons why he signed, is because, we were, it wasn't going to be a situation where he was going to come in and then go out on loan. It almost reads that he's going to have every opportunity to come in and compete with, I guess you could say, the likes of a Dane Scarlett, or maybe some of these other strikers that are at the bottom of the first team in that depth chart, right? So from that standpoint, the way that I look at this is, when he comes in January, to me, it feels like he's going to be on that first team roster through the end of the season. We actually might see him potentially in some early rounds of the FA Cup, just to kind of get his feet wet. But that being said,
who we get drawn against,
right? But that being said, it's like I get the impression, the way it reads to me, is that he is going to be at least on the first team through the end of the season. And now, whether or not they convince him to go on loan next season, or whatever his own personal training is at this point, maybe he puts himself in a position where he can compete for a spot for next season. I don't know. But that being said, it's like, from the profile that I've seen so far of him, that dude is kind of legit.
Where I think he stands a chance of breaking through, Stevie, compared to maybe Troy Parrott, is the physicality side of things. The fact that he's already got senior football behind his belt. So he knows the little tricks of the trade in terms of maybe, for instance, pinning your man, holding him, taking in the ball, little things like that, the playing with his back to goal. They're things that when Troy Parrott came through, Troy Parrott scored an unbelievable amount of goals for the underage team, even the UEFA youth leagues and stuff. A lot of fanfare around them.
Yeah.
But when he was given his opportunity, and look, it was harsh, he was only really given a game or two by Jose Mourinho. But you could see he needed a low move because there were elements, couldn't really play with his back to goal, up against, bigger and better opposition, than academy football, link up play, stuff like that. There are things he's developed once he left and went out to Holland. With Mason Mellier, he already has that under his belt, so I think it already helps him maybe get above Dane Scarlett in the pecking order, above Will Lancashire, stuff like that, because he already has 2 or 3 seasons of first-team men's competitive football under his belt. I liken it to Bergvall. Bergvall came from Sweden. Yeah, Swedish second division. But he was playing men's football. So when he came over, it gives him a better chance than, say, Tyrese Hall, George Abbott, players like that coming through the academy. And that's why he's probably progressed at the rate he has, because he has that experience behind him. And that's where I think it is an advantage to Mason Mellier, given some of the other attackers that might be around that he's sort of got to compete with. The one that I'm interested to see whether he can be better is Matisse Tell. If he can drag his game to that level and beyond much quicker, then for me, I think he has a real shot of making it at Tottenham Hotspur. Also, he's got a very clever camp around him. His agent is an Irish guy, but he played over in England. He played with the likes of Stoke City and stuff like that. He's got some Premier League experience. It's his uncle. So he's already got a guy that's been in and around England, knows the gig and stuff like that. So he's got a very good team around him that is plotting his pathway to stardom. Everything's calculated. They keep him grounded. He knows the value of not getting carried away with the lifestyle, but actually getting his head down, working, improving, all that sort of stuff. And I like that. So I think there's a real opportunity for him. But what I would say to Spurs fans is don't expect anything between now, when he arrives on the 1st of January, and the end of the season. It is way too soon to be pinning your hopes on this guy to be the answer. You have to allow him to come in, allow him to develop himself in terms of physically, more muscle and stuff like that. But also, in terms of technically and stuff like that, he still has a long way to go to bridge that gap. League of Ireland to the Premier League, it's rarely done, if any, So that's why I think I would urge Spurs fans, temper your expectations.
Yeah, and I'll say this. I'll say this as well too as we close this one out real quick. It's that you're absolutely right. I would probably say there's even a gap between the League of Ireland and the Scottish Premier League. I would probably say that the Scottish Prem is a higher league than
there's even a gap between League of Ireland and MLS. Some players go from League of Ireland out to the MLS, and they would struggle out there big time, and that just goes to show,
exactly
the job he has in his hands, right?
I would say that for me, there's 2 things that there was 2 things that I would do that I wouldn't do. Is number 1, put him in a situation where he cannot succeed. And if that is, for instance, if it's an FA Cup and we're drawing Aston Villa like we did last year, that is not a position where Mason Mellier is going to succeed. The other thing is don't put him in the academy. Me personally, I just don't think I don't think it's actually going to do anything for his development. And if you are going to loan him out, and if he agrees with the loan, Dave, then me personally, I think it should be at the championship level, where I actually think that his skill set potentially could translate. Me personally, I don't think that it makes sense to put him in League 2 in the English league, because I don't think it's going to enhance his development. Same thing with League 1. I think it's like championship or on that level.
If I'm Mellier, I'm refusing.
Yeah, but that being said, he really that's the thing. He's already turned down better clubs because he does not want to go out on loan, right? So me personally, I feel like this is going to be a situation where he's going to benefit from the competition with inside training. Not only that, there's a couple very good professionals in that dressing room that could potentially take him under his wing. Much like what happened with Bergvall and Gray as well too. Adrian here from Spurs Diehards TTID said Frank did well at Brentford and is Premier League proven. I am confident that Frank will do well and will have a strong second half. He also goes on to say, we lost our front 4: Son, Solanke, Kulusevski, and Madison. 3 if you exclude Son, all first choice players. My counter is we also got Kudus, Randall Colomwani and Xavi Simons through the door as a replacement. So there's that as well too.
I would also counter, that's the thing, no one highlights the 3 extra players that he's been given to help navigate them issues. But I'm not being funny, right? People are pinning all their hopes on these injured players coming back. There's a reason why we went and signed Mawani, because Solanke wasn't good enough last season. There's a reason why we went and signed Xavi Simons. There's a reason why we went and signed Colomwani. Look, with Solanke, I like him, but he's just not at the level we need to score week in, week out. Mawani has a much higher ceiling. You know, when it comes to Kulusevski, I'm not being funny, but I was one of the only ones out there that backed Kulusevski. You know,
I'm me too.
But last preseason, before he hit the ground running and went on the run he did, most fans wanted to cash in on the guy. Yeah. You know, when it comes to James Maddison, people say, "Oh, James Maddison come back." Postecoglou had him on the bench for a large parts of last season. People forget this, and this is why I say it's a dangerous situation to pin all your hopes on these injured players coming back, because the reality is, if you employ them in a system we did against Arsenal, Chelsea, and some other teams, Monaco, for instance, they're having a hope in hell effect in the game, because there's no game plan to be aggressive to turn over the ball, or no game plan in possession. If you put them into, like we did against Man City or like we did against PSG the other night, then there's an opportunity they can help improve. But they're not going to bring us from here to here. That's why we went out and signed the Simmons. That's why we went out and signed the Mawani. That's why we went and signed that Kudos, to help bridge that gap, you know, for them guys to take us from here to here. So I think it's just a dangerous precedent to sit there and sort of hope on all these guys. And it's funny now that everyone mentions Son, and I'm not having to go at Adrian, because I know Adrian for a while, and I know how he thinks, and he didn't want to let Son go. But the majority of fans wanted him gone because he wasn't producing, because he had lost the yard of pace and stuff like that. So I think there's an element of excuses to a certain degree, because people could sit here and talk about injuries now. No one wanted to talk about them last season.
100%.
You've got to get on with the job with what you've got available to you.
And I just want to remind folks that, you know, there's a good chance that we're not going to get Kulusevski back until after the new year. And when he does come back and when he is fit to play, it's going to take him, you know, anywhere between 2 to 4 matches to kind of get him back up to game speed. And then who knows exactly what type of form he's going to be, because this has been a long time off. He has had since he's actually had live action on the pitch, right? Don't get me wrong, I'm the biggest Kulu guy in the world, and I know exactly what he can bring. Plays multiple positions. He can help you out in many different areas of the pitch. Whereas me personally, I'm not a big Maddison guy. I never really believed in Maddison. This goes back to his Norwich City days and his Leicester City days. Me personally, I'm not a big fan of a guy that likes to pick and choose when he's actually going to be effective. Me personally, I think it's he just rubs me the wrong way. Lastly, Dave, we got to talk about these two right here. Archie Gray and Lucas Bergvall. Again, whenever every single time that we see I don't know how you feel. Every time I see about Archie Gray play football for this team, he always seems to have a good performance, and it almost feels like it's a different flavor from a guy like Lucas Bergvall, who's got a high engine, he's got a high motor, and he's going to try to do his best. Sometimes he makes mistakes, as he did against PSG, but he also largely looked good against PSG as well too. And what's interesting about this, when there were times in that match where when Sarr would try to get forward and Bergvall would try to get forward, then all of a sudden defenders would have to kind of move and shift a little bit, and it allowed Archie Gray to leak into the box at times. And of course, Archie Gray with that nice little flick that led to that goal with Richarlison, the header. And all of a sudden, you look at the class that these two players have, and when you looked at the formation that we had against PSG, and again, a massive fixture against one of the best teams in Europe, and both of these guys came good. And now that Xavi Simons is in a situation where he's coming off the bench, is this an opportunity for Thomas Frank to kind of reward these guys, and maybe it's an opportunity to sit Bittencourt as well too, and let these guys be on the pitch with Polinia?
Yeah, I think. Look, if you're Thomas Frank, I think if you're trying to get a spark out of this Tottenham team and stuff like that, I think you've got to play players that are affecting games when you select them. For instance, after the Arsenal game, he came out and said, "Oh well, that wasn't the game plan," and stuff like that. So then you sort of beg the question, okay, our player's not buying into what he's asking them to do. He made a load of changes against PSG. All of a sudden, we see a different performance altogether. So for me, I think he'd be wise to continue on with Archie Gray and Bergvall against Fulham for sure. I think with Bergvall, he provides a lot of energy. A hell of a lot of energy, a willing runner. And that's one thing I've always said about the guy. I don't ever want him to lose that, because out of possession and in possession, the guy is constantly looking to affect the game. And I think in the long run, if he can keep that, that's going to stand him in great stead moving forward. And he probably has the ability to become one of the world's best midfielders if you have that want and that desire to go and affect games. He has that in abundance. The problem is with Lucas Bergvall, he's so sloppy in possession at times.
Yeah,
it kills us going forward, but also costs us defensively at times. The amount of times I've seen that guy give away the ball deep and it's been turned over and put in the back of our own net, but also the amount of times I've seen attacks break down because of sloppy passing. For instance, the first 5-10 minutes against PSG, how many passes did the guy give away or go astray and stuff like that? That's a massive area where he needs to improve. But again, when we're a team that's been so stale and haven't put any aggression on the ball, I think you've got to use someone like Bergvall, because sometimes that youthfulness or that just willingness to go and press a ball relentlessly and on to the next pass, all of a sudden someone else goes, fuck, if he's doing it, I may go. And you can spark people into life like that. When it comes to Archie Gray, when we signed him, I got absolutely hounded for about weeks on Twitter and YouTube and stuff, because he actually came with a massive fan club I didn't expect you had behind him. But my whole thing was, he's not ready for Tottenham right now. Why we signed him when we should be signing players that should be ready, and that's what we need. And ultimately, it's going to let Ange Postecoglou down. Now, that ended up happening. But with Archie Gray, I am seeing a player that I do think has come on leaps and bounds from last season in terms of just in possession. That cross for that goal for Richarlison. Our wingers can't cross like that. That ball, it was just perfectly floated, stood up towards the back post. Kolo Muani was absolutely licking his lips. As a striker, that's the sort of cross you want. Stand it up, let me go and fucking attack it. Fair play to him. But it's not the first time I've seen that. He done that in the Europa League last season, playing at right back, I think it was, putting a lovely cross. So he's clearly got that ability. So if we can get him in more positions like that, he's definitely a person that can sort of help. But also, he's not afraid to get around and get stuck in. And I just think so far, what I've seen from the kid this year in midfield, I think he's come on leaps and bounds. And I don't think he's too far away from being given that opportunity. And then it's up to him there to take that and dislodge people. So fair play. Just keep going the way he's going there. But I think the two of them need to start against Fulham, because they provide energy. And that's what we're going to need from kickoff against Fulham. We need energy. With Paulini and Bentancur, they're a bit older, a bit wiser, got more in their legs, so they're probably a bit more tired. So they're not as maybe enthusiastic or as energetic, or maybe just don't have the legs to get around the way these kids do. But when you're playing in football now, where it's just fast, ferocious, every team is looking to go mad from our press, look to turn over the ball, you do need players like this. So for me, I think he's got to start them against Fulham and then take it from there.
The interesting thing, though, is when I look at Archie Gray, I look at a kid that's absolutely calm with the ball at his feet, right? Whereas there might be a little bit of differential between him and Lucas Bergvall. The interesting thing is, like, when you see defenders collapse on the ball and Archie Gray's got the ball in the feet, he's not jittery. He doesn't necessarily make decisions. Exactly. He doesn't panic. And his ability to play off, his teammate to get forward is something that I'm at the point where I need to see a lot more of this. The other thing, the thing with Bergvall, here's the interesting thing. Last year, what was surprising me was his ability on the ball. And as he was cutting through the midfield, he was actually surprisingly calm on the ball, and he actually made some pretty good decisions last season. And he was also rewarded with a couple of goals. This year, it seems like he has the yips a little bit more with the ball at his feet. And I don't know if this is a formation or a tactics issue that he's still trying to adjust to. I have no idea what it is, but there seems to be a vast difference between Bergvall last year to Bergvall this year. Me personally, the reason why I like him is because he provides the engine in the midfield. It's something that we don't have when it's Xavi, Polini, and Bentancur as the midfield three. There is no engine in the midfield, and I think that also is something that that I also think it's that also would actually benefit a guy like Xavi Simons as well too.
Can I ask you a question on that, Steve?
Yeah.
How much of it is down to instructions with Paulinho and Bentancur? And how much of it is down to youthful enthusiasm and willingness? Because the reason why I asked that question is because although Bentancur played against PSG, it's clear he was told not to get as far forward as your Sars, as your Bergvals, as your Greys. When he was asked about playing Bergval in that double pivot earlier on the season, Thomas Frank, he said, we have to constantly scream at him to tell him to stop running. That's why I say how much of it is actually down to instruction with a Bentancur and Paulinho, and how much of it is that's why they play, because their ability to take on what the managers are asking them to do. Because everyone makes out like Bentancur can't play or show that energy. But if you go back to under Conte, where he was
for sure.
the player that was allowed to get further forward, he went and affected games. He turned over ball. He was playing forward. He was scoring goals. Under Ange Postecoglou, he turned him into a number 6, which means he's never going to break out and get forward and stuff because of his position and what he's been asked to do. And again, with Thomas Frank, again, he's using him so deep on the pitch in a double pivot. And that's why I asked that question. How much of the energy shown the other night was down to the game plan, the instructions, and the license that Bergval and Gray were given compared to Bentancur?
I think you know this answer. It's 100% instruction, right? And the interesting thing, and the reason why I know this, is because when those three are on the pitch, of the 2 6s that are in that double pivot, which one is actually getting forward? Which one is actually putting the ball in the back of the net? Right, that would be João Palhinha. It almost feels like João Palhinha has the instruction of getting forward while they're keeping Bentancur back. As a I guess you can say as a safety net to those long balls or those balls through the middle of the pitch, right? And so from that standpoint, I think it comes down to instruction, and I also think it's also down to trust as well too. There's something about João Palhinha where he actually has that license to get forward versus a guy like Bentancur, where for whatever reason I think he prefers to keep him back a little bit. And so from that standpoint, I would probably say that 100% it comes down to instruction.
Do you think Frank needs to get rid of the double pivot? Because it's, of my opinion, he can play one of Paulinho or Bentancur there and then play 2 10s or 2 8s like Postecoglou did. That way then you allow 2 midfielders to get forward. It's an extra body break when you're in possession, but also an extra body getting forward to try and turn over that ball higher up the pitch.
Well, it almost felt like that against PSG.
Yeah.
Right. Like when I think we were lined up in a 5-3-2 and with 2 strikers at the top, it almost felt like we were playing with 2 high 10s, especially in that buildup. It wasn't our quintessential horseshoe buildup in the counterattack. It looked seamless through the mid, but then all of a sudden you would see Sarr and Bergvall, or then you would see Sarr and Gray at different times. So we were giving multiple looks underneath and also central runs into the box. So I mean, from that standpoint, I don't know. There's something intriguing with playing too high, because it allows a little bit more freedom, and it also allows to keep the 6 back that you want to keep back, and it's and it gives me personally, I think it gives better options moving forward. I think it actually from that standpoint. There were certain times where 2 things that I noticed. Number one is because we actually had multiple attackers in the box, and that was the first time in a long time that I saw more than 2 players in the box versus their 5. That was the first thing that I noticed. It seems like we had 4 in the box at all times. The other thing, though, is I think that actually kind of surprised some of our attackers, because early in that first 30 minutes, this is something that I was trying to convey during your live stream, that at times we looked a little tentative, trying to play the ball forward, because me personally, I think it almost came to a shock to certain players, like, oh shit, we have options. And it's like you would see the ball on Bergvall or Sarr's feet, and of course there's 5 feet in front of them where they can actually turn and move forward and kind of distribute. And then all of a sudden there was like a handful of times where Sarr would get into that position, he would look forward, but the ball plays automatically back, and I was like, whoa. It's like I kind of get it, right? Because that's something that they're used to. Playing the way that Thomas Frank has through the course of the season so far, and now all of a sudden it's something completely different. You know what I mean? And I thought at times, like once they got used to it, as that we went from like minute 20 to minute 40, and once we got used to it, obviously we played with it. But there was a moment there where I thought they were like ultra tentative, like it almost caught them by surprise that we had more than 2 people in the box.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely spot on. And that's another thing I've been screaming out for at times. when these players are in the cross position, where's the extra one or two players? Like, for instance, where's the winger coming in over from the far side to create an extra option in the box? Where's your player playing in that cam, flooding the box to try and get on the end of things? Almost sometimes when we're crossing the ball, it's got to be that perfect because you've only got one player in there to aim for. You know, with PSG, we flooded the box and we absolutely caught them with their pants down. And these are things I want to see continue against Fulham. I want to see us be aggressive out of possession. I want to see us flood bodies forward. I want to see us flood that box because at the end of the day, I think Thomas Frank can work by bringing that defensive structure, adding the weapon of the set pieces and throws. If he just takes his handbrake off and allows these players to get forward a bit more and go and affect the game and worry about what we can do to go and affect the opposition, I think he can survive at Tottenham. I think he could do a very good job. But that's something that needs to change. And when you hear reports coming out of the Telegraph already saying the exact same thing, that players they don't want to keep focusing so heavily on the opposition. They want to focus more on what they're going to do. And I can understand it. Like, if you're sitting there and you've got your manager telling you how good Wolves are, and you look at the Premier League table coming into the game, they've 0 points, couldn't score a goal, everything else, you're going to be driven absolutely ballistic. You're going to be sitting there scratching your head going, fuck me, like, what are we, a relegation standard team here? You know what I mean? And it's like, that's where already players start questioning the manager. And they're like, it's Tottenham Hotspur, buddy. You know, and that's where I worry for Thomas Frank, because it's not only fans that are clearly getting pissed off with it. It's clearly some of the camp as well.
What I will say before we close this one out, Dave, and I do want to thank you for jumping on today, but what I will say about Thomas Frank is that you and I have had this conversation, and what I want to see with this club is stability. And it's something that we haven't had in a very long time, where it just seemed like there was a good balance between the boardroom and the head coach. I think we would have to go back to Pochettino and probably Harry Redknapp back in the day, where there was like good harmony between the board and the head coach. And it just seems like every 18 months we've been playing this revolving door of head coaches. A lot of it has to do with the fact that, you know, after a certain point of time, that the head coaches are getting frustrated with the lack of recruitment. And from that standpoint, there's only a certain amount that they can get out of certain players. I'll just say this, that I want to see that stopped. And if that's Thomas Frank, then that's Thomas Frank. And me personally, when I look at this team, I see an incomplete roster. For the way that he wants to play, there are certain areas of the pitch that have to get better. And also with some of these incumbent players, me personally, I'm at the point where I do want to see more of the youth. I want to see Bergvall and Gray. I want to see Odegaard continue to develop. And, you know, there's certain players I wouldn't mind getting a look, you know, especially against a Fulham. And maybe this might be an opportunity for a guy like Dane Scarlett. But the reality is, one of the things that I've noticed is that there was a reason why we finished 17th. And it had a lot to do with Postecoglou. But that being said, it was also the caliber of player in which we have. That we do have some very good players on this team, but we also have guys on this team that, quite frankly, I question about whether or not they're good enough to play in the Premier League. And I think this inconsistency with the results is a combination of a few things. But what I will say is, the reason why Thomas Frank was able to find stability at Brentford is because he was there for 8 years. And when you're around a club for that long and you have a board that's willing to give you patience, you're going to eventually build a team that suits that suits the strengths of the head coach. And me personally, if Thomas Frank is done by Christmas, it would be an absolute shambolic decision, because now all of a sudden we're restarting a new project under a new head coach. How many projects have we had to stop and restart? And that has an effect on the players that are around there. It has an effect on the board. It has an effect with everybody, and it directly affects the results on the pitch. And so there's going to be more frustration. And I understand fans today are fickle, and I hate to use that word, Dave, but it's true. We now are in an era where, like, if you don't get results, fans want a coach out. Fans want a coach out, and there's no stability. And it's like, what was interesting about it, it's like the last coach that was with Tottenham Hotspur that lasted more than 2 seasons was Pochettino, for a reason, right? Because, he was able to early figure out exactly where his weaknesses are, and then try to build the gap around youth players, and he was able to make that happen, right? But we haven't had a coach given time and stability to actually try to build his team around his philosophy, because once you get into that area where the fans are out with pitchforks, the board listens and gets them out. You know what I mean? And so all of a sudden we're having to restart this vicious cycle, and we're not going to get any closer to the top four and the ambition that we want for this club, because we're always chopping and screwing managers.
I agree.
When really, you know what I mean? And so for me personally, that is why it has nothing to do with Thomas Frank. It has everything to do with stability. But what I will say is that, given time and given access to the right players, can I envision a scenario where, Thomas Frank, improves in goal and he improves on that back line and actually gets the forward players that actually fit his style of play, and all of a sudden we kick on as a team? I can absolutely see that, and I'm actually willing to see it. Because the last thing I want to see is this club continue to make the goddamn mistakes that it has made over the last 8 years, right? What's the definition of insanity, Dave? Doing the exact same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different result.
No, and look, I agree with that point in general. It's something I tried to make under Jose and Conte, that you just can't keep hiring and firing managers at the rate we are. When you look at teams that have won, been successful over the last few years, how long has Guardiola been at City? How long was Klopp at Liverpool? How long has Arteta been at Arsenal? So to prove your point, it sort of backs it up. But where the question comes around is Thomas the right guy to sit back and show the patience too? Because the reality is, with his body of work, you can only really go off the Championship or the bottom half of the Premier League. And this is where I'm a bit hesitant to go 100% behind the guy, because with Pochettino, he brought Southampton up playing a certain style of football. He didn't change that when he got to the Premier League. Thomas Frank changed his style of football when he came to the Premier League. And Pochettino got rewarded. He broke the top half of the table with Southampton. And I think he finished like 7th with them. And for a lot of that season, he was nearly on the cusp of breaking in top 4 Champions League football. With Thomas Frank, he came up from the Championship. He changed his style of football to a more pragmatic. And he's never brought Brentford anywhere near close to qualifying for Europe. And with Pochettino, he walked into Tottenham with a lot of overpaid players that just didn't give a shit. Your Adebayors, your Holtbys, your Sigurdssons, right, players like that. He tried to go with them. They weren't producing what he wanted. So in order to change the environment and the culture to what he wanted, he had no problem saying, no problem, you go and sit over there for the rest of the season. Bentaleb, Mason, players like that, come on up. Rose, Walker, come back from loan, come on into the team. Yep. He had the balls to change it up drastically, which is ultimately what bought him time, especially in Daniel Levy's eyes, because he's like, fucking fantastic. I'll get rid of Adebayor on 60 grand a week. I can keep paying Bentaleb his 1,000 a week, stuff like that, Thomas Frank needs to do that. This is where went wrong. This is where Jose went wrong. This is where Conte went wrong. If your overplayed superstars aren't performing and they're not pulling their weight for you, there's a massive opportunity that they're going to show dissent in the camp and they're going to drag players along with them and be anti you. At what point do you fuck them off and you show some bollocks and you bring through academy kids? For instance, Arteta done it at Arsenal. That's why the board gave him the time they gave him, because Aubameyang, massive problems with him, despite him scoring goals. He wasn't pulling his weight in and around Arsenal, in terms of he was turning up late all the time and stuff like that. If you're trying to create a winning environment and you're trying to create an environment that's spearheading towards success, you have to cut people like that. Does Thomas Frank have the bollocks to do that? I'm not quite so sure. Arteta did at Arsenal. He brought through Nketiah. He's brought through Saka. He had Smith Rowe in there for a long time. He's now brought through Lewis Skelly, Waneri, players like that. Ferguson at Man United. He was nearly on the verge of the sack. Said, fuck this, changed the culture, brought through the class of 92. Is Thomas Frank going to do that at Tottenham Hotspur? I'm not quite so sure, to be brutally honest with you. And that's where I worry for Thomas Frank, because if he wants to create this winning culture, he also has to help aid it. It can't just be, I have to wait for the transfer window. At what point do you go, screw that, let's bring you back from loan, you're having a good season for the under-21s, let's give you an opportunity. I'm not sure he has the balls to do that, but the biggest thing for me, like I said, was Pochettino came into Tottenham already playing a certain style of football that took the Premier League by storm and helped Southampton punch massively above their weight and was on the verge of breaking and showing a threat to some of the top teams. with Thomas Frank, he's never shown that ability with Brentford. He's only ever really shown the ability to survive in the Premier League and a bit beyond that. That's where I struggle to see if Thomas Frank is really going to change up the culture, but also his style of football to suit Tottenham. That's where Nuno fell down at Wolves. He had his way, counter-attacking way, came to Tottenham. It wasn't working. Kane never looked the same player he did. Son never looked the same player that he did because we were sitting too deep. We couldn't get up and affect teams the opposite way. It ended up costing him his job. And it will go the same with Thomas Frank unless he does something drastic like Poch and Arteta done, but also change his style of play a little bit as well. Because with Pochettino, he was brave. He made sure his players were super fit. He made sure they were able to go out and put pressure on teams. He made sure that when we were breaking, we could do it at speed. With Thomas Frank, I just don't see any of that, and that's where I really worry for the guy.
Well, and I'll finish on this. That the one thing that Pochettino required was his players to run their cocks off. Like if you look at the work rate that he had at Espanyol and in Southampton. Right. I think I saw this one metric where, when it comes to like kilometers per match, I think Southampton were like 100 kilometers up, we're 100 kilometers up off their nearest competitor. Like that was a requirement, being 100% fit, but also requiring you to run. And that's something that right now Thomas Frank struggles against teams that actually are not afraid to run for a full 90 and press. Whether it's a high press or it's a mid block, you like we saw it against Chelsea, we saw it against Arsenal, right? That's the difference between Arsenal and Spurs. It's not necessarily talent; it's the fact that Arteta requires them to run for a full 90 and to hustle their asses off, right? There's a reason why we're pinned in against those type of teams, and it has nothing to do necessarily with quality. It has everything to do with sheer determination and execute exactly what their coaches are actually requiring from them. And then, of course, when it comes to finishing, obviously talent wins out. But the reality is, it's like this is what this team is not doing. We are not running for a full 90. And the other thing that I will point out real quick is the fact that I think Thomas Frank is a little gun shy, right? Because he realizes he's at a big club. And and the results absolutely matter. And so I'm seeing a lot more risk averse than front-footed football. I think he's trying to double down, thinking like this is the way that's going to help him save his job. If we can actually stay in every game, then it comes to maybe one or two different plays, which is the difference between winning and losing. And so I think he's looking at this like, well, okay, I need to hold my breath until January so we can actually get more players in. So if we can be defensively resolute, we're going to be in every single game, so I can actually point to something and say, "Well, listen, man, we were just one goal off a draw or one goal off a win." You know what I mean? But look at our defensive, our defense is resolute. But as we're seeing against teams like PSG, Arsenal, Chelsea, they know exactly how to play right through it, and it makes us look even worse.
But you know why Arsenal? Why every single one of them players are running their cocks off? Because when Arteta came in, he got rid of the likes of Aubameyang, players like that, brought through the likes of Nketiah, Saka, players like that. I agree. So all of a sudden, those who aren't pulling their weight will go out the door with Aubameyang. Those who do pull their weight stay. Then once you add in players, all of a sudden they're already coming into an environment where this is how we work, this is how fit we are. And I'm telling you now, if you don't do it, you won't play, and he will bring in another academy kid. Despite the money you're being paid, despite the money we've paid for you, he will not persist with you if you don't have the right temperament to sort of fit into this environment. Is Thomas Frank going to bring that environment to Tottenham Hotspur? He has to. I think he's tried to maybe do that and use Basuma as an example. But I think there's others in and around the squad that he also needs to do the same with in order to really sort of cultivate that environment. Because I look at it and I go, okay, Rice, he's a big superstar, but he works really hard. And that's because he's walked into that environment and that's all he's known. Thomas Frank needs to do something drastic like that at Tottenham so that when we do sign these new players coming in, they are coming in. It's the same with Pochettino. When he created that environment, next thing you knew, players that were coming in, they had no option but to play like that, or they're gone, or they just won't play. And Thomas Frank needs to do that. I feel like at Tottenham in years gone by, we've had managers that sort of look at it and go, I know he's not exactly what I want, and I know he's not exactly doing what I want him to do. But, he's more experienced. We paid this money. He's on big wages. I'd rather play him than say give one of the academy kids a chance. But where you lose is that player will make a mistake. He won't track a runner. He'll switch off. He'll cost you a game. Whereas that youth player, he'll run his fucking socks off for you. And at least even if he doesn't do anything for you going forward, you know defensively you can rely on him just because he's willing to run and put himself about a little bit. And then all of a sudden, once he starts doing that, everyone else looks at it and goes, oh, fuck me, I better pull my socks off. If this guy's doing it, there's no excuse for me not to do it. They almost showed them up and they dragged them along with them. Thomas Frank needs to implement this at Tottenham Hotspur.
The interesting thing, and I know we're up against it, but, for the last couple of months, you and I have been talking about the lack of efficiency off the left side, whether that's, playing Jed Spence in that left back position or, the evolution of a guy like Wilson Odegaard. Yet we actually had the answer before we put him on loan with Rangers, Mikey Moore. That was a player that, granted, the experience isn't there, but that being said, you ask him to do something, he's going to do it at 100%. And we see that every single when we see it when Bergvall and Gray hit the pitch, we see 100%. And maybe it might be a little bit to a detriment for Lucas Bergvall because he feels like he's got a little bit of the yips, but a guy like Mikey Moore in this system and his ability to run, just saying, man.
No, I agree with you. Like, that's one thing that sort of pissed me off with even some of the Spurs fans around Mikey Moore.
Same thing with Vuskovic.
At 17 years of age, people are expecting him to come in and rip it up like Lamine Yamal. Not everyone's that talented, but Mikey Moore is insanely talented. Everyone around Tottenham, knows how talented he is. Let's not forget, Real Madrid, Dortmund, and some of the biggest teams around Europe tried to sign this guy. And in and around the England camp, they're well aware of this guy's quality. Now, he didn't maybe come in and do it week in, week out. But in the Europa League, in them early group games when we were struggling, it was his infectiousness, his enthusiasm, and 9 times out of 10, his quality that ended up helping us win them games. Last year, when we were down against Everton away from home, no one could create jack shit. This guy comes on with 5 minutes, gets one touch, puts a ball in the box, Richarlison scores a goal. Or is it Kulusevski won it? And I've seen more than enough from that kid to go, you persist with that. You definitely keep him around the squad. You dip him in and out, and you're going to get quality off this guy. And the reality is now everyone's sitting here moaning about the left wing. But Mikey Moore was producing with very few minutes that he was given compared to some of these overpaid players. Why didn't Frank recognize that walking in? Why was he happy to allow him to go out on loan? For instance, everyone sits here and cries out, we don't have a number 10. No one wants to talk about the fact that we signed one guy for like nearly 60 million to try and solve that problem. We could have also given Jamie Donnelly an opportunity. A guy that whenever I've watched him, runs his socks off out of possession, but in possession, I've never seen a player at the under 21 level at his young age, adjust his game, because when he was at Tottenham coming through the academy, he was a striker banging in all the goals. We brought in Will Lancashire. We dropped Jamie Donnelly back to accommodate Will Lancashire. You go back and look at this guy's highlights from the under 21s, the balls he was playing, the passes he was making. You're telling me we couldn't do with a player like that in this team? Everyone goes on and praises about Bergvall and Gray for their enthusiasm, their lack of fear. You don't think Mikey Moore and Jamie Donnelly would also produce something similar?
I agree.
If given the fucking opportunity. And that's where I think Frank has let himself down. He should have kept the Donnelly. He should have kept the Mikey Moore around. Because what you do is you keep them in training. Because of their hunger and desire to make it, they're going to do everything at maximum intensity. All of a sudden, players then look at that and go, I'm not having him outshine me. That's where egos come in. They start playing at that intensity. And all of a sudden, if Leicester, you're going onto the pitch, they're already wound up with a point to prove.
I completely agree with it. By the way, and that doesn't exclude the fact that Donnelly's not exactly having the greatest go right now at Stoke. But that being said,
week in, week out, the manager's not going to change a winning team. He didn't go in there with preseason or anything like that. So there's context around that. I hear that thrown out by fans all the time. But he didn't join them for preseason, which meant he was already at a disadvantage because he couldn't really showcase the manager what he could do in an uncompetitive environment to get himself in the plans. And then when the season starts and they're winning games and they're looking for promotion and they're on course for it, the manager's never going to take out a player just to bring this guy in and accommodate him, especially if he knows he's not going to be there next year. He's already looking at, next year in terms of how well they're doing this year. So it makes Jamie Donnelly's job even tougher. But saying that, he got his competitive debut for Northern Ireland, stepped up and banged away a penalty, scored for him and stuff like that. The talent is there. Thomas Frank
I'm
needs
at
to be
the
cautious with these guys in January because he can't keep sitting there and going, I've got injuries, fine. But you've also got a lot of talent out on loan. A wise manager would bring some of them back and go, I could use you.
Yep. And I think I'm at that point where, come January, I would actually bring back 3 guys off alone, Mikey Moore, Jamie Donnelly, and Vuskovic from Germany. Because, by the way, and it's like you have far more, you have 4 more weapons at your disposal, where if you want to play a back 3, you can play Vuskovic in a back 3. And me personally, that's just the way he's playing right now in the Bundesliga is absolutely through the roof.
Yeah.
By the way, if Mikey Moore actually had signed for Borussia Dortmund, he's already a starter by now in the Bundesliga.
100%.
100%. Go ahead, Dave.
No, I'm just because whenever I've tried to promote, say or try to highlight some of the quality we've had, a lot of pushback I get is he's too young. But one thing I always say to people, actually go and look at all the clubs in the Premier League. Some of them are fighting for more up the top. Some of them are scrapping at the bottom. You go and look at a lot of top clubs around Europe. In fact, most clubs around Europe, they will all give youngsters an opportunity, bar Tottenham Hotspur. We are the only ones that never give any of our academy prospects a real opportunity. It's not on.
And by the way, it's one of the reasons why I absolutely love Crystal Palace, is because that's what they've done pretty much every single year in, year out. They'll have 2 or 3 youngsters that have that promise, and they'll circle them around very good, proven veterans, and then they'll kick on. And all of a sudden, you're going to have teams be in for them, like Michael Elise with Bayern Munich, Eberechi Eze, even Wilfred Zaha back in the day. It's like there's a way that they operate. And there's always going to be a pathway for some of your best youth kids to be in a first team squad. Put them around veterans that actually play well off of them, and then they kick on. And it's something that we haven't seen at Spurs in a long time. Quickly before I go, I want to remind everybody to hit the like and subscribe button, and also hit your notification bell so you don't miss out on any upcoming content here on Stateside Footy. Dave, what is the programming over there on the Irish Hotspur this weekend?
Yeah, so today is more behind the scenes, get all the pre-match build-up stuff ready, and then also get the predicted lineup ready and recorded. That'll be dropped then at 8 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock then for the pre-game, and then the watch-along then after that. So that's the programming for the next 2 days, and then Sunday off, and then time foot. Jack is back Monday, which is a massive help and a weight off my shoulders. But you know what? Anyone that is tuning in, please do what Stevie's asked you to do in terms of likes and subscribe. I know how hard it is to try and get a YouTube channel off the ground and stuff like that. So make sure you do that, because to be honest with you, Stevie, I could chat to you all day. It's been a good conversation. We're at it an hour and a half. And it doesn't even feel like that, to be honest with you. So I've enjoyed this. Thank you.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting when it comes to subs on this channel, over the last 4 months, we've gone up by 150. So I will say that the channel is growing, and I do want to thank you guys for those who have already hit the like and subscribe buttons. I do appreciate it, and that's the goal, man. We're going to be covering obviously Tottenham Hotspur and some Premier League, but also a lot of the U.S. men's national team and of course Major League Soccer. So I like what I do, and I like it when you give the green light to come on the show, Dave. I always love having conversations with you, man.
No, I do enjoy it. Look, you're fair to me in terms of every week, every game on the weekend, you're always there, and I am conscious, of trying to give back and give you a bit more of my time. Sometimes I do forget that I commit to other podcasts on a Friday.
Yeah.
Then I've also got all my own stuff, which takes me hours to prepare for the Saturday. So sometimes it's not always doable, but when I can, I'll always be here to give you, to give you some of my time, my man.
Well, I do appreciate it. Yeah. And that's the great thing, man. From the start, when we started linking up, man, I've never asked anything of your time, and you've been more than hospitable on your show. And I actually like coming on and talking Tottenham Hotspur. So from that standpoint, I'm always grateful. But that being said, it is what it is. I understand people are busy, and me personally, I just I don't like to ask things of people. But I do appreciate when you do come on. So yeah, I do appreciate it. All right, guys, that's going to do it for us. And of course, I will be on the pre-match build-up. I believe it's tomorrow for Fulham on the Irish Hotspur. And I think tonight at 5 o'clock, I'll be on Spurs Diehards TTID. So there's plenty of me to go around when it comes to the Tottenham Hotspur, YouTube universe. So there's that. And of course, this weekend we have the MLS Cup Conference Final doubleheader here on Stateside Footy. Those 2 matches are going to be absolute bangers.
Who's in it, Stevie?
In the Western Conference, it is San Diego versus Vancouver. And of course, Vancouver got Thomas Muller from Bayern Munich.
Was Maurice not going mad about Vancouver recently, about the pitch or something like that, no?
Yeah, because they play on a plastic pitch in Vancouver. And here's the thing, right? So here's the funniest thing. In the quarterfinal, Vancouver went up 2-0 at the half, and then Sonny bagged a brace in the second half to push it into overtime. And then it got to a shootout, and LAFC just collapsed in the shootout. It is what it is. And Vancouver advanced in the shootout. San Diego is a first-year team. This is their inaugural season. They have Andreas Dreyer, who is a Polish striker, and they also have Chucky Lozano, who's a Mexican national who used to play for PSV out there in the Dutch Eredivisie. And the Eastern Conference, obviously, it's Miami with Messi, Jordi Alba, and Sergio Busquets.
They're winning. They're winning outright, showing it.
Yeah, and they're playing NYCFC, who upset the Philadelphia Union.
Who have they got now in their team?
They had Costa Rican striker, I think it's Alfaro Hernandez, and he just tore his cruciate in this last international window. So their top scorer is out, and of course they're led by U.S. keeper, number one keeper, Matt Breeze.
Don't they have the guy that was recently called up to the Republic of Ireland squad? I'm almost sure.
O'Toole.
Yes,
O'Toole. Yep, they sure do. And by the way, it's funny because this guy right here in the chat says, speaking of plastic pitches, we need to do something about our advanced training pitching facilities. In the United States, plastic pitches are common. They have them everywhere.
They're coming over here as well.
And the reason for it is because it's cheaper. Instead of maintaining a grass pitch, it's cheaper just to install it, pay the freight up front, and you know for a fact that you're going to have a pitch there for 5-6 years without having to worry about maintenance or upkeep. And a lot of owners are going with that.
See, the thing is as well, a lot of these clubs don't have the money of Premier League football or English football in general, so it's actually cheaper for them to have an artificial pitch and maintain it over a couple of years and then relay it rather than a new pitch nearly every single season. Then you have to employ groundsmen and all that sort of jazz on top of it. They just don't have the money. It's the same problem here with the League of Ireland. You don't have money to maintain grass pitches. And also somebody, with some of the weather we have over here, it's just not sustainable, because when they did have grass pitches back in the day, more so back in the day, a lot of the games were getting called off.
Yeah. I remember seeing the Premier League in the early days where you would have bare spots on the pitch, or it'd be like a muddy ass bog.
Yeah, around the goals.
For sure.
Our box would be just one big mud pit usually in the middle.
I remember seeing. I watched a throwback match. This was Everton in 84-85, and they were playing. This was back when Everton was really Everton, back in the early 80s under Howard Kendall, and they were playing a Merseyside derby against Liverpool, and the entire one half of the pitch was literally just a mud bog, and it's like it's just it was essentially a free for all. There was no runs, there were no good passes because it would skip off the water. I guess the question would be, it's like, if this is starting to come into the European side of things, and all of a sudden you have top flights that actually have plastic pitches, like what is FIFA's response going to be towards that? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
that's going to be the interesting thing, because as of right now, you can't play a FIFA sanctioned organization or a sanctioned tournament without a grass pitch, which is why this upcoming World Cup, a lot of these stadiums that have plastic pitches, they're going to have grass pitches in order to host a World Cup match. Same thing with UEFA as well too. And so from that standpoint, it's like, I'll tell you what, it's like if owners are looking at this as a way to save money from their overhead, and they install plastic pitches, like what is going to be the response from UEFA and FIFA?
Yeah.
So it's going to be interesting. All right, guys, that's going to do it for us, Dave. I want to say thank you again. It's been great. As a matter of fact, I hope I know you guys don't celebrate Thanksgiving, but I hope your Thursday was excellent. And I hope you have a very good weekend as well, too. Same thing for all those guys out there in the UK, all of my friends, man. I hope you enjoyed your Thursday. And to all my friends here in the United States, man, I hope you guys had a wonderful Thanksgiving with your family and your friends. That's going to do it for me. Until tomorrow, you guys enjoy your weekend. Have a great day, guys.